Well, good morning. Welcome to Form-A-Palooza. I can't think, yes, right, David. I can't think of a better way to spend a Saturday. It's talking about district government forms. It's fantastic. I want to thank the Lab at DC for organizing today's event and our colleges from across district government who have joined us for the day. David Yoakum, who leads the Lab at DC, and his team are here. His boss, the Chief Performance Officer who runs our performance management office, is here, and there's a number of staff members from the Office of the City Administrator, and so I'm so thankful for all of their hard work in organizing this event. So can we just give them a round of applause? I also want to thank Dr. Wilkins and AU School of Public Affairs for providing the space for today's event, and to the Association for Psychological Science for today's breakfast and lunch. As a government, we're committed to customer service, and one of the most common ways we experience the service of government is through forms, whether they be paper or online. And a badly designed form can be a hassle. It can be a headache, cause delays. It can even cause someone to give up and not fill out the form at all. So why does this matter? It matters because it can be the difference between accessing a public service or not, between starting a business on schedule or not, between getting a driver's license or not. Director Babers is here from the DMV. And so we want to make our forms better. We want forms that are easy and intuitive as possible, and that ensures needed information is collected accurately. Today starts that movement. You'll focus on 5 prioritized forms, and hopefully at the end of this, we'll make it easier to do everything from to get that driver's license, to start a small business, to securing needed disability services. And beyond that, the insights from today's speakers and facilitators, coupled with your experiences and input, will set an example and spark momentum to improve other district forms after today. The mayor had a goal that she articulated on the fly, said this week, we should have a form that has not more than 10 questions, and we should get rid of 100 forms in the district. And so she issued that challenge to us this week, and so you have the pleasure of starting that process for us. Later today, you'll hear from Cass Sunstein, a Harvard professor, noted legal scholar, and behavioral economics expert. Cass's insights will help shape an exciting outlook for the afternoon sessions, during which you'll be rolling up your sleeves and showing us how to create intuitive, efficient, and more usable forms. Later in the day, the mayor will also stop by and check you out and see what's going on. She's excited about Form-A-Palooza and ready to hear ideas about how we can improve and create a better experience for district residents engaging with district government. So we're excited about today. We're excited about the good work that is on the way. And over time, we know that we can improve all district forms, and today, again, initiates that challenge. So thank you all for your participation, and have a wonderful day.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, City Administrator, for kicking us off today. My name is Jenny Reed, and I'm the Mayor's Chief Performance Officer. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Okay. So I lead a team of people who use data, strategic planning, and innovation to continuously improve the programs and services you use every day. And we wanted to kick off this morning with a little bit of a discussion about forms and why we're here. And so I'm really excited to be joined by 2 great panelists to help us do that. The first is Dr. David Yoakum. As the City Administrator mentioned, Dave is the director of our newest initiative, the Lab at DC, which just had its official, thank you, public launch with the mayor on Thursday. The lab generates timely, relevant, and high-quality ideas and evidence to inform our most important programs and services. David's expertise draws on that cognitive foundations of judgment and decision-making, and how that knowledge and associated methodologies can be extended into applied settings. He and his team are also the brains behind today's event, so we're very excited about that. The second, just to my left, is Dr. Barbara Bowser, partner with Climate Communication Group, who has over 20 years and ultimately people. Her work sits at the juncture of behavioral sciences, organizational change and leadership, and user-centered design. She leads projects to help government agencies make research-based decisions around communication projects and then implement results widely and effectively. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So my first question is pretty simple, but pretty important. Why should we care about forms? And maybe I'll start with David.
So this is a great question for me. The start of Form-A-Palooza, softball. I mean, it starts with what City Administrator Young was just mentioning. I mean, forms are the primary way, I think, we interact with government. It's one of the most common tools we use for submitting information, for requesting services, for giving feedback, that paperwork. And so the design of that paperwork, yes, it can be a hassle if it's badly designed, and that's not nothing. That leads to delays, that costs firms money and time because staff are getting chewed up using those forms. But I think if you really think about it, at a more fundamental level, some of the most serious problems happen whenever those hassle factors get so serious that a person just doesn't complete the form at all. And we have lots of examples now of sort of subtle bottleneck points that can cause some fraction of the population to stop and not submit that application to get student aid to go to college, not be able to submit that permit to start a business. And that's where it's kind of a really deep fundamental problem that if you care about the program you're trying to deliver, if you don't pay attention to that sort of final inch in the way people are going to interact with the paperwork to get that program, your program doesn't even get off to a start to see if it's going to work because people aren't accessing it.
I agree with everything David has said. I think forms are really the face of government. I see a lot of energetic, helpful people sitting in this audience, but your citizens aren't going to get to meet you, but they're going to get to meet your forms. And so those forms represent you. That's what they will see of government. And if you've looked at government forms, and I'm not picking on DC forms, any forms from government, we all use them, you can think about what face they give to those organizations. So it's really critical from a perception standpoint that your forms are good, that they represent your intentions as government. But I think more deeply than that, it comes down to serving citizens. We want citizens to have access to the benefits that they can get, and when they can't complete forms, they simply cannot get those benefits. And I'd like you to think of someone who needs SNAP benefits and cannot get through the form. Put that user in your mind, because that's what happens when forms don't work. People don't get food. People don't get additional money that they might have access to. So we really need to keep in mind that forms are much more than just a piece of information. They're much more than just a thing. They are a conversation that you're having with your citizens, and they are really the key to getting citizens what they need.
So to follow up on, what you mentioned about the person not being able to get SNAP benefits, why do you think forms got so complicated? Why are we here today having to have a Palooza event just to deal with something government does every single day?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think forms in many ways reflect the processes behind them. And many of us work in government, we understand that processes get complicated. They are based in multiple regulations often. We're trying to integrate those into creating a form that meets legal, regulatory requirements, process requirements, and all of those things come together to create this very complex situation that now has to be reflected in a 1 to 2 page form, hopefully. Sometimes they're a lot longer. I know I once worked on a project on redesigning SNAP forms for across the United States. This was with the Department of Agriculture. And there was one of the states had a 35-question addendum just on what assets the person owned. And one of the questions was something to the effect of, do you have cars that don't work on your property? And I thought, why? Why? I mean, this is too much, 35-question addendum to the form, which was already 14 pages. So it just reflects a lot of those inputs. I think it's one of the great opportunities that everyone has today is to start cutting through those complexities. What do we really need? What processes really need to be reflected? What regulations really need to be reflected?
I'll build off that a little bit in two ways. I mean, one is that if you think about the variety of things that government does in the history of how agencies have come into creation, there's a really large coordination problem on the government side that can cause, from the perspective of the user, from the citizen, this annoying problem where you're getting asked a lot of the same questions over and over and over again. And it reflects this fact that the agencies that are asking for that same information, whether it's basic things about where your business is located or information about taxes, whatever the case may be, they legitimately need that information. And until we figure out ways on the back end to make those systems sort of communicate to each other in a streamlined way and can figure out how to coordinate this massive bureaucracy to ask those questions more efficiently, a side effect is that that kind of repeated question is going to happen. And I can tell you from working in government, it's not trivial to solve that on the inside, although there's lots of work trying to figure out how to do it. The other thing I would add here is that, and this isn't just government. We can pick on bad forms across the world. And I think one of the fundamental problems that happen is that this kind of slowing down to really think about how an actual human being processes information on a page, the sort of language we use in everyday conversation, the ways we like to express our opinions and decisions, oftentimes you don't see that thoughtfulness going into the design. Instead, you see, well, I'll just dump out all the information. I'll dump out all of the different choices, and people are just like a computer that are going to kind of crunch through all of that and pouch it all out in a perfect way. But that's not how we do this, right? I mean, we're tired, we come home, you get a bill or something like that, you want to be able to fill it out in 60 seconds. Did the entity designing the form put you in their mind when they were designing it? And the answer is that they often haven't done that. And I think this is something that, again, it's not just government, we see it all over the place, but places like now with Form-A-Palooza give us a chance to fix that, and then we can show that off to the private sector and everyone else too.
So Barbara, in your work with other governments, what are some of the key elements you've seen that are really needed for effective communication to the public?
Well, I think David touched on this. I think one of the most important is to get a connection to the user. So you really need to start reorienting yourself, putting yourself in the mind and the shoes of the citizen out there who's going to be using these forms. And that's really reframing how you think about design, how you think about forms, how you think about information, because you're no longer thinking about it in terms of what you need to say, but what they need to hear and how they need to hear it. And so it's reframing that entire dialogue in a way. So I think that's one thing, and I love that you're doing this because this gives you the opportunity to step back and really think about the user critically and really say, who is my citizen using this? What context are they working within? How are they actually going to use this form? How long does it take them? I think that there are a lot of other tools you can use, such as consumer testing. Go out and test your products. Actually watch people. It's a humbling experience to watch people use your products because you learn so much and you say, how did I miss that? I thought this was the clearest form ever. And then you see someone stumbling over something and you say, wow, I can't believe it. But now you have an opportunity to fix that before it goes out to millions of people who need to use it. So I think that connection with the user, with the citizen, is really the core.
I'm going to ask David one last question and then open it up to the audience for a few questions if you guys have some things you want to start thinking about. So David, what do you think are some of the top fundamental mistakes that people make when asking for information?
Well, I think from a sort of framework perspective, it's what I was describing just a moment ago of not really putting yourselves in the shoes of the person who's filling out the form and trying to systematically think about what are all every little step they have to do in order for that form to be executed in the right way. And to sort of unpack that a little bit, yes, a lot of this is kind of common sense, and I think whenever you're looking at things, you'll find places where, I remember one of the first forms I encountered, it was a paper-based form asking people to go pay online for something, and the URL that was in the form was like 80 characters long with an ampersand and all of these crazy things that a person would have to go to the computer and type in right in order to access it. And you don't need advanced degrees to know that that's not the greatest design. But there's also a category of insights that are perhaps less intuitive, and we're going to be able to talk about a lot of these in a moment, and Cass is going to talk about this more, and your facilitators are going to know about it more, that are based on psychology, on user-centered design research about, again, how we know people process information, and some of this can be subtle. So to give just one quick example of another project I worked on, it was a situation where we were asking firms to report how much they owed to the government, and they would self-report this. They'd literally type it in the computer. And it reminded me of some experiments that were done with undergraduates in the lab. And some of these were done by Dan Ariely. Some of his crew is actually here in the crowd. The way this experiment was set up is that, say you're the undergraduates, you all come into the room, I give you a 10-question quiz packet, little matrices, and I time you, and you're answering them. And then what I'm going to do at the end is I'm going to ask you to all come up to the front of the room, and you've got a little form, and I want you to tell me how many you got right, and sort of sign that that's accurate. Okay, and I'm not going to check, but just do it, crumple the paper up, throw it away. And so you come up and I got 6 right, I got 7 right, and I'm going to give you $1 for every one you got right. Then when you leave, I go snoop around in the garbage can, as scientists are wont to do, so I can actually look at the correct number of answers that people are actually getting to compare it to that self-report. And what you found in this study is that it's not that a lot of people are lying a lot. Very few people do that. But most of us have a little bit of fudge. You got 6 right, you said 7. You got 8 right, you say 9. Right? I mean, it's the same way that you might take an AU pencil or something home, and you're sort of taking it from work, but you don't feel like you're being super dishonest about that. You would not go into the utility closet and take a box of pens, right? The fudge factor is right there. What's interesting about these studies, though, is that if you move that signature to the top of the process before you ask people to start reporting, that fudge factor goes away. It's kind of like they're being prompted to be more vigilant, and the reporting gets more accurate. And so we took that insight and went back to that government form where people were reporting it for real, moved the location of where that signature was, ran a test where some firms got that signature at the top and others didn't, and then we looked at the accuracy of the reporting, and sure enough, just like with those undergraduates, the form was collecting more accurately, and it saved the government millions of dollars in that case over the course of the year. So this is real impacts that can happen from a little bit more nuanced understanding about how people interact with the page.
That's great. So we have a couple minutes for questions. I see one hand up already, so I'm going to you first.
So I'm so amazed and excited by what's happening before my eyes. I've been in business for 20 years. We've got 55 employees. We do systems for the federal, a dozen different systems in DC. The life cycle of these forms often end up in some of our digital repositories, so the tax returns, the building permits, these basic business licenses, the land records, all the DCHR records. So these forms are, as you all know, triggers and artifacts of these mission-critical business processes, and they live on for decades in some cases, right? Personnel actions live all the way till retirement. And so I can't decide if I'm in a dream or a nightmare. And I've got with me an intern at the company, and I dragged him in. He's going to be doing his computer science degree starting at University of Greensboro, North Carolina. So you've got someone who is kind of farther along in their career and someone who's just starting out, right? So he's been working in our shop, helping to build some stuff. But Eugene McCarthy in 1979 said, as quoted in the Chicago Tribune, as saying, "The only thing that saves us from the bureaucracy is its inefficiency. An efficient bureaucracy is the greatest threat to liberty." And some of you may have heard Elon Musk this week or last week go on and on about this existential crisis of artificial intelligence. So when I started out building some of these systems, I comforted myself with the confidence that I would never live long enough to see Big Brother. And I'm not that confident anymore. So what is it that you all are thinking about in these systems to prevent 1984 or Big Brother?
It's a big question for this morning.
So we move from the softball questions to the hardball questions. I think what you're describing there is a question we ask ourselves about government all the time. What are the things we want government to do for us? What are the things we don't want government to do for us? And we have a democratic process for having that discussion. And I think that's where we should have the discussion. We shouldn't hide it and try to do things where if the democratic process says this is something we want government to try to do, a few rogue individuals get to go in and try to make the process super hard to disrupt that. And so if we're going to make a decision to do something, let's do it really well. If we instead don't want to do something, let's have that discussion transparently and make that decision as a community. I think that's really what it boils down to.
Yes.
So in the discussion about making forms more accessible to people or more intuitive to people, what level of literacy or reading level are you actually aiming for in forms?
Well, I hope you are here later today because I'll be speaking about plain language and knowing your user, and a big portion of my presentation is going to be talking about literacy levels. So when we look at literacy levels, I think it's often eye-opening. We don't realize that we're dealing with probably 17%, I may be wrong, I've got the stats on my slides, that are dealing at or functioning at a level 1 or below. That's a huge portion of our population. And when you look at level 1 tasks, you're looking at finding one piece of information in a typical document. So if it was a document that was giving you preschool rules, it might be identifying the time by which you need to bring your child into preschool. This is very simple information, reading a price tag. My belief is that you should be striving to reach every level of literacy, and that is very difficult to do. So you may not always reach that goal because there are times when it's simply impossible. You look at a tax form. A tax form can never be at a level 1. It cannot, because it requires tasks that are automatically, naturally at a higher level. But you want to do your best to make those tasks as clear, obvious, transparent, using the best design and the easiest language that you can, so that you can hopefully, even with something that requires all of that, make it as accessible as you can. So I don't know that there's a hard and fast number. It's like when people ask me, what should the reading level be of something? Well, it's very difficult to say because certain topics, you will not be able to get to a 4th grade reading level. You can try, but you won't, because conceptually they are too difficult. But you're always striving to be aware, and I think it starts with the awareness of what is necessary for different levels of literacy, and then trying to bring it down.
So we are unfortunately going to need to move on, but you will be able to hear from these experts and more throughout the rest of the day and continue to have these conversations. And so I just wanted to reiterate what the city administrator said this morning. You know, we got a charge from the mayor on Thursday to cut 100 forms and keep them all at about 10 questions. So we're really excited to get started on that. We're glad that you guys are here to help us do that today. And I'm just really excited to see and hear about the work you do to simplify our forms.
What I want to spend a little bit of time on is unpacking at a high level, sort of what are the form parts, say a little bit about what a behavioral audit is, the kind of mindset to have whenever you go into the breakout rooms and start looking at forms, and then I'll give a few examples from a form that I've worked on before, and a few examples further of some of those behavioral insights that I was talking about. So, parts of a form. Y'all have actually already started to do a wonderful job at this and at the level of detail that's going to start to matter whenever you're looking at the paperwork itself. To my mind, at a highest level, some of the categories I was thinking about fit this diagram. At the top, and this really is something that Barbara's going to talk a lot about later, is the who it's going to, the to whom, and who it's coming from, the from whom. I think I'm using the who's and whom's right there. I'm not sure. Actually, you could check me on the English later. But this is that communication aspect of really understanding, if you receive this form, who is it that is asking you for information, it's where it's going to come. And then from the perspective from the sender, really understanding who it is they're sending this document to. And it can be surprisingly hard to get this right. The purpose of the form, this was set out in the crowd. What do we actually want people to do? What information is needed, and this is a category that gets broken up in 1,000 different ways that you're starting to do on the board already. Dates and deadlines, when do you need people to act by? Ways to submit, I've got the little S there might be multiple ways of doing this. Having a very clear understanding of how to do it is critical. How to get help, if you're confused by what's on the 4 corners of the page. And then I would also add, lawyers. There's often disclosures, privacy issues, confidentiality issues. There might be things that just have to be on that form for reasons related to the law or other kind of information or regulatory things we have. And there's good purposes for these, and when you're working in the government, you need to accommodate this. Now, how do we go about thinking about forms? I sometimes think of this as a behavioral audit. In the same way an accountant might audit numbers to look for ways that there's suspicious things in the finances, auditing the form for suspicious places where a person might get tripped up. And what I want to kind of emphasize here, let's say you have something like a form where you're asking people to fill out a few pieces, I don't expect you to read this, fill out a few pieces of information and then mail it back. Maybe you want them to mail back a check. You might jump straight to just looking at the page itself and the words that are there. You have to do that. You have to do that carefully. But you have to slow down even more than that to start thinking about the context within which that person is likely to find that paperwork. So for me, when I'm doing an audit like this, are they going to notice the envelope or the mailer? Is it a colorful envelope? Is it something that's going to look like spam that they're going to throw away? Are they going to open it? Are they going to be bored by it or postpone it? Are they going to open it on the spot? Are they going to read it? Are they going to keep reading it? Are they going to understand the statements that you're making? Are they going to sort of construct preferences as they're reading it? Are they going to decide, yeah, this is something that's important. It's worth my time to continue on. Or this is making me think of this other thing I care about. They need to form some sort of intention to act. So as they're reading this and you're asking them to do something, they need to sort of say to themselves, okay, this is a good idea to pay this bill. I'm going to pay this bill. Psychologically, this is sort of forming that plan, but that's not the same thing as starting to execute it right away. They need to maintain that attention over time. The dog's barking at him. My 2-year-old Ethan's running up to me. Do I forget to pay the bill that I just decided I want to pay? I need to map that intention onto specific actions. How do I pay? Is it by check? Can I do it online? I need to think about that. Again, cognitively, this is something that can be a lot to ask. I need to initiate that first step. I start to pull out the checkbook. Oh, I don't have a pen. I go to get a pen. Ethan starts yelling at me again. I forget. Like, again, you can get tripped up here. I need to adjust to feedback. If something's not working, if I'm going online with that really long URL and it starts to break down, do I know how to go back and fix that, or do I give up at that point? And then this just starts to loop and loop and loop if you think about it, okay? All of these things have to go well in order for somebody to successfully engage with that paperwork that you're asking. And I think when you put yourself in this mindset, when you think about the form, you're going to quickly discover that there's many, many more aspects to that page that are going to come to mind that you're going to slow down and ask yourself, is this as intuitive and easy as to use as possible? One of my first forums I worked at, it's a love-hate relationship with this one. It's a blow-up. Again, I don't expect you to read it. This is from the Department of Treasury. It's something that is expressing an overdue bill and asking someone to fill out a little bit of information and send a check back. Here's how it begins. Your unpaid delinquent debt owed to the Department of Health and Human Services, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Medicare overpayments, now that's the non-MSP one, it's important to recognize, has been referred to the U.S. Department of Treasury for collection. According to the records of the Department of the Health and Human Services, we finally get to it. You owe some money. Plain language when it comes up later, Barbara, I'm sure you're going to sort of tear this apart, but this is not an uncommon sort of thing to see. Here's another form that actually had one of those sinister URLs I keep talking about. This is a paper form. This is literally what you had to type into the page to sort of figure out. So problem with plain language on the last one, a problem of just hassle factors that can trip someone up here. Now let me give you that third category of things where there can be sometimes non-intuitive aspects about the way a form is designed and how it can influence how people engage with it. The example I want to use comes from theeconomist.com. I like this example because, like I said on the panel, one of the things we sometimes assume is that people are kind of like a computer who can process all the information in the world and aren't going to get tripped up by design elements, and we can pick on economists as the profession that pushed this for a long time. Prasanti's laughing. She's an economist on the team. This is your fault. I hold you personally responsible for it. So here's what's being asked. Do you want to subscribe to theeconomist.com, just the online version, for $59? Or do you want both the online version and a print edition? Get that physical copy. You like the copy. It smells nice. $125. Now, there's no right or wrong answer to this, right? Whether you want to pay an additional 60 or whatever bucks in order to get that nice hardbound copy is just a personal preference. It's worth it for some people. It's not for others, whatever. Turns out in this case, not exactly even, but about 40% of people choose the online only. About 60% of people were choosing the online plus the paper and paying a little bit more. Now consider this scenario. The same decision that's being asked, but we introduce a third choice, a print subscription for $125. Now, who wants this one? Nobody. This is a horrible choice. This is a terrible choice. If you want to pay $125 for a print subscription, you might as well choose the third one and get the online form for free, right? This is a terrible choice. Everyone should ignore this, and it shouldn't change your preference ordering between these first two. What do you think we find, though? Something weird happens. Nobody does choose that third option, but suddenly the preferences between these two start to shift, and more people are choosing this print plus web subscription. It's kind of like if you were at a restaurant and somebody comes up and they say, do you want vanilla or chocolate ice cream? And you say vanilla, and I go, oh, I'm the waiter, I forgot. We also have some nasty mulberry pie in the background. And you're like, no, I don't want that, but now I want chocolate ice cream. It's like, what? Why would your preference flip as a function of the third thing that's there? The key here, in the sort of intuitive way to think about it, though, is that that third option causes you to think differently about the first two choices that were there. That online piece suddenly feels like it's free, right? Even though the actual choice itself didn't change. And the larger insight here is that when people are engaging with their form, the target question you're asking them to focus on, the way they're going to go about thinking about it, can be affected by the other pieces of information that are on the page. Because those other pieces of information on the page are going to potentially make certain reasons or values more salient when they're thinking about that target issue. Let me give you one other example. This is a scenario where, let's say you're making decisions about how you want to invest in your retirement plan. And this is one where there's a number of different types of vehicles, bonds, stocks, and things like that, that you're asking people, how do they want to allocate their funds? So, you got $100, where do you want to put these $10? Where do you want to put those $10? And think about something like this. In one type of form, there's 10 options that they can sort of divide it across. And in another, there's 9. I could also draw a third one here that said 11. Does anyone have a prediction about how this design feature of the number of options to sort of slot their dollars into might affect what happens in a pretty surprising way. I heard a mumble. What was the guess?
Spread it evenly across all of the rows.
I have $500 and there's 10 here. Oh, it's tempting. I want to put 10, 10, 10, 10, 10. It's easy to divide this. And in fact, with this sort of form, when they've done this for real, about half of people do exactly that. They split it evenly. This, if you're like me, is tripping you up. This is not an easy divide to do. And so people can't use this sort of simple rule of thumb of just split it evenly. They slow way, way down. And what you start to see, relative to this one where it's that evenly split, people start to get much more attention and precise about the way they're allocating between those plans. So something as simple as whether the number of slots is easy to divide or not prompts people to scrutinize the way they're distributing those numbers in slightly different ways. Another very sort of subtle design feature that can influence how people engage with the form. Now, what if we're not sure the best way to design a form? And you're in your rooms, you might come up with 3 or 4 different things that you kind of all have compelling reasons to think this might be the best way to do it. What do? You sort of fight it out over your intuitions, and then somebody gets to claim whoever kind of screams the loudest? A/B test. Test it, my man. Yes, test it. This is one of the things where the design work can be coupled with testing to really figure out factually what's working the best. We don't have to fight over our intuitions. What this means is taking that form, we've got our different designs. Let's say there's 3 or 4 different designs we want. Let's say there's 2, just to keep the math simple here. Rather than fighting about the intuitions, let's take those 2 forms and let's push them out to 1,000 people and let's flip a coin. And if it's a tails, they get form A, and if it's a heads, they get form B. And then we can compare between those 2 which form is working better. Which one are people most likely to submit, that have the fewest errors, that get the fewest complaints, whatever the case may be. And then you can see empirically, measure it, evaluate it, which form is working better, and that can be the one that you scale up. Or if none of them are working well enough, you go back to the drawing board and you design more and you test those. So this kind of double punch of the design work coupled with the testing is the sort of powerful machinery to figure out the best way to design these forms. And today, what you're going to be doing is starting off especially on that first frontier of getting in the rooms, figuring out these design ideas or sets of ideas that you have, and those are going to be the prototypes that we can continue to work on. If we need to test them and things like that, we'll look for ways to do it. You're going to learn a lot more as the day unfolds about plain language, about behavioral insights, from Cass Sunstein, from Barbara Kinsley, from the facilitators, and importantly, critically, from those of you who've come to this room. Because the key part of all of this is that you're the ones that are actually filling out these forms. We all are. And so our experiences on what things seem to make intuitive sense or not are really the ultimate judges of how well these forms are doing. So this type of work would never work if we didn't have everybody in the community coming together to actually do this. So I really appreciate everyone doing this. This is the start of something very cool, I think.
There'd be no helpful advantage for them to note on here whether or not.
Back and say, oh, remember, if you want to move this field.
Very detailed markup of the DVLEZ, both sides of it over here.
Online systems that exist.
It is my sincere pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Cass Sunstein. For those of us that work in psychology, in economics, in user design, and care about forms, this is a person who really doesn't need any introduction. But Cass is the Robert Walmsley University professor at Harvard Law School. Previously to this, in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2012, he was the administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which for those of you who aren't familiar with this office in the federal government, although I'm sure everyone knows the intimacies of OIRA, but it's really a nerve center through where questions about paperwork and forms go through. And so it's been a perspective of not only a phenomenal research career, but really one of the most important positions in government in thinking about forms and things like that. And so it's a very special honor to have him here to talk to us. I'll say that you might have also encountered many of his works through a number of books that he's written, including way back when, the second Bill of Rights, which I wanted to plug because one of our teammates in the city administrator's office wrote a thesis about this, I learned earlier. He's written Nudge, Why Nudge? Simpler, The Failure of Government, and a lot of other books that I'm not going to read because I want to make sure he has some time to give his remarks, but I will say your latest one, I think it's your latest one, unless you wrote one on the way over here, is The World According to Star Wars, which I have a lot of questions about, but we'll save that for another time. But with that, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Cass Sunstein.
So I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm amazed and inspired to see what you're all doing. So a thought, which I think is actually reflected in early reality, is DC is going to be a national leader in terms of form simplification. Also, for those of you who don't know Star Wars intimately, as I do, you know the Jedi Knights, who are the forces of goodness, the light side of the Force. They believe in simplification of forms and in pre-population, and what they're especially keen on, the Jedi Knights, is, and Yoda said, it was implicit in Yoda, I guess the phrase was, automatic enrollment you must. So what Yoda was ahead of was that sometimes even better than form simplification is form elimination, such that people are automatically in the system. They don't even have to bother. The Sith, you know about the Sith? These Emperor Palpatine. When the Republic was destroyed by the Empire, its first, and in the view of many Star Wars aficionados, most evil step was to introduce more complex and longer forms. So it wasn't random that I worked on Star Wars. Okay, so there's a guy named Steve Krug, whom I've never met, who's not famous, but who has one of the best book titles in history. It's called Don't Make Me Think. And what Krug is a specialist in is in website design. And his insight, which is, you know, a profound distillation of decades of work in behavioral science, is that frequently if you do something that executes, let's say, Krug's law, don't make me think, you can make people's lives much better. That anything that violates Krug's law, it's effectively a tax, a non-monetary tax, a cognitive tax. And for people who are busy or non-specialists or trying to live their lives, that tax can be more fierce even than a monetary tax. When I was in the US government, I had a slogan, plate not pyramid. And it was a little mysterious. It remains one of my organizing principles for thinking about law and public policy. What you're looking at is what was for a long time the most visited website in the US government. It's the old food pyramid. There's a person, gender unclear, shoeless, walking to the top of a pyramid. At the top, there's a white triangle. Imagine you're a student or a teacher or a parent trying to figure out what the U.S. Department of Agriculture, after intense work, is advising you to do. Do you know what that white triangle is? Is that thinness? Is it death? Where is the person going? Now ask yourself what those stripes reflect. Can you associate the red and the blue and the green with identifiable food groups? I work on this stuff and I can't. Can you recognize the foods that the US government is calling out? There's only one that's very clearly recognizable. It's on the bottom right. Do you see it? It's a shoe. Is the US government telling you, please, eat your shoe? Okay, so we got rid of that and replaced it with the food plate, which basically says, make half your plate fruits and vegetables. And it's gone viral. Now, whether this is the ideal way to give people clear, simple guidance, the plate, not pyramid idea suggests that frequently when people are resisting, or incapacitated by something that the government is doing, it's not because they disagree or dislike it. It's because they don't understand it. So the problem of that Krug law violation, the tax, and the problem of cognitive complexity is signaled by the mantra, plate, not pyramid. Okay, here's a problem that the US government has faced for a long time. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this, which is that children, and this is not politically contested, children who are poor are entitled to meals, breakfast and lunch, but the percentage of children who are eligible for those free meals, who sign up for those free meals, is far short of 100%. They have to fill out a form, and a lot of them don't. Now, this is, in a way, a searing failure, because we're talking about little kids here who aren't getting food. There are imaginable solutions, aren't there? Notes that are clear and straightforward, moral suasion to the parents, something that would approach a warning to the parents. But the government tried something very different, which is called direct certification, which says that if you are eligible and the locality knows you are, you don't have to fill out any form at all. You're in. Now, there are mechanisms to prevent the problem of ineligible people actually getting food, and there are mechanisms to allow opt-out for people who don't want to participate in the program, but they are directly certified. The latest statistic suggests that over 11 million children in the United States are, as a result of this program, getting those meals. That's just a number. Use your imaginations a bit, if you would. And here's a little help for imaginations. But imagine that 1/100th of those kids are standing outside of this building. I don't think there'd be anyone here who wouldn't be in tears. Yes? Okay, here's a note on scarcity, and there's a reference to Krug's law about taxes. Taxes tax economic scarcity, complex forms tax cognitive scarcity. In my view, the most important book in behavioral science since 1910 is called Scarcity. And it asks, what do lonely people, busy people, hungry people, and poor people have in common? Okay, so if you need to eat, you're really busy, you don't have any friends. Everyone in this room has friends, yes? Some of you don't? Okay. Or if you have economic struggles, there is a form of cognitive scarcity in the mind. That is, loneliness prompts focus on how am I going to get friends. Busyness prompts I don't have enough time. Hunger prompts I need to get food. And poverty prompts I need to find a way to have money. All of these things take over the human mind and deplete bandwidth. They ensure that processing power in the head is greatly reduced. Here's a little data on intelligence tests. If you take a group of poor people at a local mall and give them an intelligence test, they're going to do fine compared to people who have plenty of money. Basically, there's no difference. If you ask both groups to solve an arithmetic problem first, they're still going to do fine. Basically, there's no difference. But if you ask both groups, poor people and not poor people, how are you going to come up with $2,000 if your car breaks down next week, and then ask them to take an IQ test? The poor people's IQ test plummets, and the non-poor people's IQ stays exactly the same. Poor people's IQ plummets by about 8 to 9 points, which is about the same amount that your IQ falls if you've had no sleep the night before. Now, what makes that I think, remarkably revealing finding is it suggests that if you are struggling with economics and thinking about how you're going to solve your financial situation, you are going to act dumber, not because you are dumber, but because there's less bandwidth. Okay, that data I just gave you is like one slide to 300 pages of findings about the depleting power of being in a tough financial situation. That suggests that form-filling requirements imposed on people who have cognitive overload anyhow is going to be really corrosive. Much more corrosive, I think, than we've anticipated, such that a form can be devastating to people's capacity to participate in economic or social life, which means that policies that impose form-filling obligations, and they're really well motivated, sometimes by people who love those programs best, those policies can be really ill-directed, self-defeating. Okay, one great solution, I'd say the behavioral gold medal winner to the problem of cognitive scarcity is a default rule. That is automatic enrollment. And I hope you're all thinking of situations in which the solution to the form-filling problem is automaticity. So for savings programs all over the United States, people don't have to sign up, workplaces automatically enroll them, and the result is to create a skyrocket in the level of savings. The direct certification program has exactly the same form. It's automatic. I'm going to highlight two reasons why default rules are so powerful. The first is the power of inertia, and the second is the power of suggestion. The book Richard Thaler and I wrote called Nudge, it has one original idea, only one, that's kind of pathetic, but it has one original idea with respect to the universe of heuristics that people use. Heuristics are mental shortcuts. The one original idea is the yeah, whatever heuristic. It didn't really make it in academic journals, the yeah, whatever heuristic. But the idea is human beings will often follow the yeah, whatever heuristic, meaning if something is the default, it's what happens if they don't do anything. They'll say yeah, whatever, and they'll go with it, which is why a default tip in a taxi cab tends to increase significantly intake. It's why default thermostat settings tend to be very impactful. People don't turn them down. And it's why in many areas where people interact with government, the default really matters. Inertia is powerful, and the default has a suggestion in it also. It has an informational signal which people hear. Okay, so here are a bunch of issues. You can pick your favorites. Some of them overlap with the things you've been discussing today. And the question really is what might help. Here's a little idea. This is from 2012. It was my last act in the federal government. And it said, for complex, this is basically a quote, I think it's the shortest memorandum ever issued by the Executive Office of the President. It's little. You're seeing basically the whole thing on one slide, less than one slide. Basically, agencies have to engage in advanced testing of information collections, meaning forms, to make sure they're not too confusing, to get information about the burdens, and to figure out how to reduce burdens. That's a directive from the Executive Office of the President. Is there 100% compliance? I don't think so. This is painful for me, too, for two reasons. One, I'm a citizen of the United States, and two, I wrote this memorandum. But the story is I was ordered to write the memorandum. It's the only time in 2012 that I recall that the president, just out of the blue, gave me an order. And that's the order. Now, what I am commending to you, that if we had full compliance with some version of this in the District of Columbia, and it could be that the testing is as simple as what happened this morning. The learning is massive, and it could be that even the instruction to engage in testing concentrates the mind in ways that the mind would not otherwise be concentrated. Okay, so we know there are behavioral insights teams of multiple kinds all over the world, including in localities throughout the United States. President Obama issued an executive order which President Trump has shown no objection to, which basically says use behavioral science in order to design better policies and programs, including better forms. Okay, we're going to get very slightly academic for a moment. Don't go to sleep. It's only slightly academic. I have to, or I'm going to get fired. It's my contract. I have to get a little academic in slides. Okay, here are some behavioral points that help produce, I think, 5 Nobel Prizes and counting. The first is too straightforward to deserve a Nobel, which is that people are greatly bothered by complexity. What makes that an important finding is the magnitude of the adverse effect, not the existence, the magnitude. We know that human beings have limited attention, such that the number of things that they're looking at in any moment of interaction with a website or an event or a product is smaller than you think. It's work to give attention, and people will economize on work. People suffer from 3 aspects of mammals, I think. All mammals tend to have these things. Present biased, they're focused on today and tomorrow and not the long term. I just got a Labrador Retriever puppy, and she really has present bias. But if you are interacting with the government on something that might benefit you in a year, present bias can create big problems because you're not going to focus on it. People can be unrealistically optimistic. 90% of drivers think that they're better than the average driver and less likely to be involved in a serious accident. There's only one demographic group that has a realistic sense of its own capacities and of what other people think of them. Only one. Everyone else is unrealistically optimistic. Can you guess the people who get it right? The clinically depressed. They're right. We know that people hate losses, and if anything looks like a loss from the status quo, they are going to run like the plague. Okay, these findings help explain 6 points. Default rules really matter, as we've discussed. Incentives may not matter nearly as much as you think, and I can say in my time in the federal government, I was startled to see that a significant economic incentive, negative or positive, often wouldn't influence behavior nearly as much as we expected. Why? Maybe it wasn't salient to people. Maybe it wasn't today or tomorrow, but next year. Maybe it was drowning in a sea of things that people are thinking about. So incentives are much less meaningful often than we anticipate. Choice architecture, meaning the architecture against which people make decisions, is both really important and not avoidable. Any form has an architecture in it, and the architecture can often dominate outcomes. People can use a nudge, and I'm going to explain that, and simpler is not the worst slogan in the world. Here's just some data about automatic enrollment and savings, and I'm hoping that some of you are thinking about areas where DC could get more automatic than it now is. A tiny example from Massachusetts, now my home state. Renewal of a driver's license isn't quite automatic, but it's really close to it. At least unless there's something unusual in the situation. To renew, you got a little note saying it's time to renew. Then you go online. It takes approximately 45 seconds. And unless you've had some experiences with the law, I guess, it just comes right to you. It's essentially automatic. For savings, what this slide shows that at every end of the income distribution, there's a big increase in participation from a shift from please sign up to sign out if you don't want to be in. So opt-out produces these massive rates, and opt-in produces these much lower rates, even if opting in is pretty easy. So if I have one little lesson from this slide for you, there's a new paper showing often automaticity crushes even simplified form filling. Simplified form filling is great, but if you can make it automatic, better. Okay. This is the financial aid form. Actually, it's the flow chart. This is a picture of government failure. A little data for you is that simplification of this form has the same impact in getting people to go to college as increasing the subsidy by several $1,000s. Okay. A nudge is captured iconically in a GPS device, which helps you get in the direction you want to go while respecting your goal. So see this as completely valuing people's own judgments about their ends, but it helps make life more navigable. In the Netherlands, there was a 44% reduction in spillage as a result of the painting of a fly on the urinals in the airport. Don't ask me who came up with that 44% figure or how they did that. Nonetheless, what makes this particular urinal revealing to, I think, the enterprise of form filling is it is drawing people's attention to a place where it's kind of good to draw it if you want to reduce spillage. And it anchors on the fact that people's attention is limited and you have to do something to capture it. Someone from Germany actually sent me this. It's a real postcard. Those aren't real frogs, so you needn't be alarmed. Okay, I'm wondering whether, in terms of the work being done here with respect to forms, it's possible to use something like this as a method for producing better outcomes for people. So the idea is sometimes if you specify the social norm, you can get a significant behavioral change. A little finding from the United Kingdom, a recent one, is that there's over-prescription of antibiotics there as here. The doctors who were in the top percentiles of over-prescription were informed of that fact. As a result, over a 6-month period, there were tens of thousands of fewer prescriptions than there otherwise would have been. Informing people of the social norm often creates a very significant change in behavior, and that can be enlisted in the form-filling process. Okay, this is basically a cafeteria that is nudging people in healthier directions just by putting the healthier choices in the places that people most go to. It's instantiating the idea, don't make me think, with respect to food. Okay, so what we're talking about is a feature of the environment that affects choices without imposing coercion or any kind of material incentive. The word navigability is much too complicated, but I think it's helpful. Often the form-filling process is challenging, and what people need is an increase in navigability. And please remember, if you would, the corrosive effects of scarcity. Even for people who aren't lonely, aren't hungry, aren't particularly busy, and aren't poor, cognitive scarcity is often a real challenge for interactions with the public sector. And for the relevant population for many government programs, those 4 good conditions don't hold, which means the scarcity problem is far more severe. Okay, I'm going to end with 10 nudges, all of which are related to the enterprise here. Often, I suggest, default rules can be enlisted as a mechanism for helping people. In the US government, the word pre-population, I thought about the way some people think about the words Taylor Swift. You know, that's I like Taylor Swift too, but I like pre-population even better. That's sick. Okay, think of your very favorite singer and how happy that singer makes you. Now think of the word pre-population. I want that word to make you as happy. And the reason pre-population is happy-making is that it ensures you go onto a form and most of it's already filled out. Maybe all you have to do is sign your name. It is akin to a default rule. Even better is you're in, you don't have to fill out the form at all. Okay, simplification is, of course, a cousin to use of default rules. Information or disclosure in a way that's clear and intelligible is 3rd on the list. Warnings are 4th. And 5th, the one in red, is reminders. And the reason the word reminders has an asterisk, which triggers another word, you see the slide, which is reminder. That seems like the producer of the slide had a problem. or some sort of obsessiveness. I'm pleased to say that's not true, at least not with respect to slide production, maybe with respect to Boston Red Sox, but with slide production, this was intentional, which is that reminder deserves to be in red letters and also to get an asterisk next to it, because remember, people's attention is limited, and reminders are often far more important than one would think. I'll tell you my own experience with the Paperwork Reduction Act in the federal government. What struck me time and again, and I'm sure you're seeing this and helping to fix it, the people who design forms are well motivated, they care about people, they're not cruel, they are nonetheless a lot like people in an unfamiliar city that you visit who tell you when you ask, how do I get to the gas station? Just go up right a mile, turn left, there'll be a green building, go straight, make a sharp left, you'll see it, you can't miss it. And they're not trying to play with you. They know it so well, when they say you can't miss it, they're sincere. But since it's so familiar to them, the experience of the user is elusive. And I found in the federal government time and again a form which seemed transparent and clear to the American people was anything but that. That signals the conversation with President Obama, yes, and his instruction for me to write that very short memo. Okay, reminders often are the equivalent of a fix to the problem of form producers who are too specialized to understand how an ordinary person will deal with the thing. Okay, here are 5 more nudges. Increases in ease and convenience. We've talked about that. Uses of social norms, non-monetary rewards, which could be provided for redesigning forms. Active choosing and prompted choice, and I'm going to say something about that, and pre-commitment strategies by which people agree in advance to a certain course of conduct. The one I want to highlight here is active choosing and prompted choice. Sometimes a default rule on a form is a little paternalistic or aggressive. But just to ask people on a form, online or otherwise, is this a thing that would suit your situation, can have a very large effect on outcomes, especially if it's something that people might not be inclined to think about because it involves the long term. So just to ask people, would you like this? It could be slightly annoying, but it could also change someone's lives, especially if it's the sort of thing that really would be a benefit to them, but which would not engage them unless the form actually asked them. Okay, so I'm going to end with some words from someone who wrote mostly very simple poetry. I think the greatest English language poet of the 20th century, William Butler Yeats, who said something that I think is relevant to everything that's being done today. Please, don't wait to strike till the iron is hot, but make it hot by striking. Thanks.
Professor Cass-Sunstein, thank you. That was wonderful. I wish we had time to use for question and answer with you, but you have a plane that I know you need to catch, so we'll let you get out of here. Team, please make sure we give him the form so he can do that homework on his airplane ride. Nobody escapes work on the forms. It's my pleasure to introduce Barbara Kingsley, whom everybody got to meet this morning on the panel that we had. I'll say again, though, that Dr. Kingsley has a very special expertise in helping government think about how to communicate with citizens and how to implement that work. And she's been a partner, she currently is, with the Climate Communications Group. She's also a lead judge with the Center for Plain Language. This morning, she confirmed that I used who and whom correctly, so I know she means business. Please join me in a warm welcome for Dr. Kingsley.
Thank you so much. It's great to see everyone again. So I want to, first of all, say that it's tough following Cass in a speech, because that was wonderful. But I loved that he talked about us being Jedis. And I'm here today representing the Center for Plain Language, which I feel has really been an organization with boots on the ground, helping government, nonprofit, and private corporations create information that all people can use and understand. And I also want to note how important the job is that you're doing. A lot of times when we think of forms, it's like, oh, whatever, it's a form. But forms are critical. Forms are how we communicate with the government. It's how government communicates with us. It's hard to underestimate how important that is. What I want to emphasize in my talk today is to help you reframe your thinking around forms as not just information, but a chance for dialogue with citizens. So a form's more than a piece of paper. It's a lot of things, but it's definitely more than a piece of paper. It's more than a screen on the computer. It's a chance to have a dialogue with citizens. You ask them questions, they try to answer them, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, and then you respond and you provide answers, and even more importantly, you often give them something they need. You give them a license, you give them benefits, so something's happening in this transaction. But how effective that dialogue is depends on how well you know one another. And too often we focus, as people who are designing information, on what we need to know, what we need to get, what we want to ask. And we forget one very important thing: the person who's going to be using the form. So who are they? What do they care about? What do they need? What do they need from you? How much do they know? What's their baseline? Where are they coming from? What challenges them? Do they have issues around accessibility? Do they have issues around literacy, numeracy? What are the challenges they face? Other disabilities? Do they understand the process? You understand the process really well. You're the designers of the process, but do they share that understanding? And are they under stress? And Cass made a great point about scarcity. Stress affects how we're able to interact with information, how we're able to complete forms. Time constraints affect that. So all of these are very important considerations as we develop forms. So I want to talk about how we can understand our users better, how we can really understand citizens and what they need. So first, I want you all to start reframing in your mind. Whenever you look at something, try to imagine who's going to be using this form. Who are they? What color is their hair? Do they have children with them? Are they sitting in a waiting room? Are they at home? Are they on their lunch hour? Are they in a rush? Imagine them. The more rich you can develop that imagination of your citizens, the better your design will be. Think about the context that they're working from. Think about their cognition. What affects their cognition? Are they able to have sustained attention? Do they have cognitive disabilities? Do they have perceptual issues, meaning do they have issues around vision, hearing, other elements? So all types of cognitive issues. And then comprehension. What can they understand? What is their baseline level of literacy when they're sitting down to fill out this form? Learn about them. Talk to them. Leave your office and go find users. If you're developing a form for, well, I'm picking on DMV because we were in DMV. Go out into the waiting room. Watch people. See what they're doing. Talk to them. And then design to them. Design to your users. Not just design what you think you need to put out there because it meets your requirements, but what do those users need? And ultimately make them part of the dialogue. Because again, you don't want to sit up here in a castle designing things for people. You want to be on the ground with them, designing with them. So what do we know about users? I can't tell you a lot of specifics about individual users. That's data that you can get. I'm sure a lot of data David has about who your users are, but I'm going to give you some more macro elements that we know about users. So I'm going to start here with this slide. Can everybody see this slide well? Okay. Pretty well. All right. Well, it's a bus schedule. There's a question here. On a Saturday afternoon, if you miss the 2:35 bus that leaves Hancock and Buenaventura, and you're going to Flint Ridge and Academy, when will the next bus come? Okay, so I'm going to get some show of hands. How many of you say A? It's too small? Yeah. Very hard to see. Okay, I was hoping it would be bigger. The basic choices that people seem to find are 3:05 or 3:35. Most people say 3:05 because if you look down here, it says 2:35, that's the one you're missing. The next one comes at 3:05. The problem is that if you look up here way in the corner in small type, buses run 1 hour apart at all other times of the day and Saturday. So it's Saturday, so really the next bus is not going to get there until 3:35. When I give this to audiences, I would say that typically about 65 to 70% of them get the answer wrong. Okay? And this is a bus schedule. This is not a complex tax form. This is not something that should require great cognitive burden. It's a bus schedule, and most people get it wrong. When you look at adult competencies, and this is what in the past has been known as the Adult Literacy Survey, but now it's the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, they surveyed 150,000 people between the ages of 16 and 65, and this was done in multiple countries, so you can compare the US against other nations. It measures competency in literacy, numeracy, and problem-solving in technology-rich environments. I'm going to talk about the first two, literacy and numeracy, although all have relevance to forms design that you're doing. So we have 5 levels. Below a level 1 is locating one piece of information in relatively familiar text. This goes all the way up to level 5, which is integrating information across multiple texts, synthesizing ideas, and then evaluating them. Reading a price tag is about a level 1. Because we recognize a price tag. Most of us already have a cognitive map of what a price tag is, but often it has other things on it, like a barcode, other numbers, so it's not quite below a level 1. It's pretty firmly at a level 1. What about that bus schedule? Where do you think that fits here? Thoughts? 4 or 5? It's actually around a level 3. So you're identifying one or more pieces of information, but you have to make some inference as you're using it. Where do you think a tax form would fit on this? Okay, yes. A tax form is off the cliff. That's way up here, maybe level 10. But it is certainly at a level 5 because you're trying to get information across multiple pieces, multiple texts, so bringing things from your W-2, from other forms, and now completing this form and having to make inferences. So let's talk about where people fit on these levels of literacy. So when we look at the percentage of adults 16 to 65, there are about 17% of people that are at level 1 and below. That means 17% of your users are going to have difficulty with things like reading a price tag. About, you see this nice big chunk in the middle, about a little more than 60% or closer to 70%, is at a level 2 and a level 3, which is not that high because bus schedule was at level 3. And then when you look at level 4 and 5, 13%. We radically overestimate what our users can do. Yes? This is US English speakers in the US. They did do some work with those who speak English as a second language. So that's that's not represented here. These are native English speakers in the United States. So I show this because it's sobering, because we tend to think that people can do better, understand more than they actually can. And because we're coming from an incorrect basic understanding, we design to a higher level from the get-go than we should be. So let's take a look at the literacy example. Test takers presented with a table showing benefits for different muscle groups. They have to find gym bench, and they have to assess the ratings. This is a level 2 question. So again, 17% are not going to be able to use this appropriately. Let's move on to numeracy, because numeracy gets worse. This is the ability to use numbers and make quantitative calculations. When we look at this, we have 19% at level 1, 8% below. So in this chunk, we are looking at over a quarter of the population functioning at level 1 and below in terms of their quantitative numerical literacy. Level 4 and 5, remember, we've bunched those together, 10%. So again, we have a nice big chunk in the middle, but we are still dealing with a huge number who are level 1 and below. And this impacts all of your forms, because most of your forms have some number represented, somewhere where a person has to enter, say, the number of hours they've worked this week. That's a numerical task. Here's the numeracy example from the actual survey. They had to look at a table and then a chart and find the mistake. Where do they not match? Right there. This is a level 3 question. So finding this mismatch. So again, I show these to demonstrate to you that people are automatically functioning at a much lower level than you believe that they are, which means that you need to bring your baseline down when you're developing forms. So how do we make this dialogue stronger? What can we do? So the Center for Plain Language, which I'm here representing, this is our forum of advocacy, is helping people try to make documents, including forms, more usable for the populations that they serve, so that citizens can get what they need and get it more efficiently, get it quickly, get it easily. So a definition of plain language, a communication is in plain language if its wording, structure, and design are so clear that the intended readers can easily find what they need, understand what they find, and use that information. So they need to find it, they need to understand it, and most importantly, they need to be able to use it, because what's the point if they can't take that information and then translate that to action? 5 steps to plain language. First is what we're doing right here, and you can go do a lot more of. Identify and describe your target audience. Who is using your form? You can get the data that will show you what literacy levels people in this area are functioning at within the district. You can find out even more about them. What income levels, any basic demographics, that information is out there. So you can get kind of a nice understanding. You can start going and talking to people, even more importantly. What challenges you? What would you like to see? What could we do to make this process better? Then you want to structure the content to guide the reader. So again, the structure builds off of the user. What does the user need to see first? not what do I want to say first. And we had a great conversation in the DMV room about this, and I'm looking at you because this is the part about putting the name and basic demographic information up front versus putting it somewhere else. And you had a great point about redesigning systems so that the systems make the forms easier. Absorb that work for your users. Find ways that you create systems that make the job easier for the user. Not easier for you, easier for the user. Write the content in plain language. So choose words that people would use. Don't choose esoteric jargon, terms of art, because your users aren't going to understand that. Be as plain as you can in the words that you use, and even more so in the sentences that hold those words. So it doesn't mean much to have easy words if you have a 65-word sentence, which I saw yesterday. People cannot get through that. So you really need to pay attention, not just to the words, but the structures around them. Then you want to use information design to help readers see and understand the information. And what I mean by information design is things like headers, a strong grid, white space, using things that visually guide the user's attention through the form. And I heard that this morning. Marie, you've been great about talking about fonts and justification and white space. These are critical. The words don't matter if there are so many words on the page that they cannot find it, and it's not in any order that they can navigate effectively. So again, do that work for your user. Create the form so that it's easy for them to find what they need. And finally, work with your user groups and test. I love that I'm hearing testing. I heard it this morning. I heard it in the groups. I heard Cass talk about it. That is wonderful. Testing is cost-effective. You don't have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to test. You can walk out into a lobby, ask someone to sign a consent form, and ask them to work with a form in front of you. Just watch them. Watch them. So I want to give you an example. This is old example, because those of you who work in SNAP and TANF will notice that this still references food stamps. So we're back a few years on this one. But this was an actual form that was being used. This was simply the first page of the form. And when we worked with SNAP offices within the states, and we worked with all 50 states and the district, there were often forms that were 30-plus pages. I remember one that was 37 pages to get SNAP benefits, which at the time was called food stamps. That is too cognitively complex. I will guarantee you there were many, many people who said, not worth it. Not worth it. Any benefit that I could get is not worth 37 pages of my time. But this was simply the first page. So what do we think about this form? This first page. Pretty good? It's not bad. Yeah, it's got lots of white space, right? Okay, but it has some issues. So first of all, it's not structured around the user needs. It asks for the name up front, and this is what we were talking about in the DMV room. But what are people really concerned about when they get this form? Are they concerned about giving their basic information? No. What do they want? Food stamps as quickly as possible. How do I get my benefit as quickly as possible? It doesn't answer the user questions. And one thing we know from the research is that all people approach text with questions in their mind. And the questions are pretty basic. You get a piece of information, you want to know, why am I getting this? What does it have to do with me? What do I need to do with it? Any piece of information can be improved by answering those reader questions as quickly as possible. It's a heuristic. It gets them through it more quickly. The design uses white space, but it doesn't use it effectively. It doesn't help our eyes. It doesn't draw attention to the places where we need to look. The key task, how do I get food stamps, is buried. It's after other information when it really should be emphasized. And it was never tested to see if it worked. I guarantee you that if it had been tested, they would have noticed that people's eyes would have gone directly over the applicant information and straight down to this heading, how to get food stamps, because that's the question that they have. So, revision. Answer questions the users have. How do you get food stamps? Can you get food stamps faster? Order the information in a way that makes sense to the users. So put it in the order that makes sense. Tell us about you can come after, how do I get it? Use a clear structure with headings and subheadings. And you can use white space and a grid to organize the information. So this is all the same information that was on the prior form. But I like to think that this one is more inviting, and it increases the user engagement. It strengthens the dialogue that we're having. It makes it more likely the citizen is going to get what he or she needs very desperately, probably, which is food. So plain language gets you closer to that effective dialogue. It focuses on the user, and it makes decisions around them. Again, that's a reframing. What does my user need? Not just what do I need to say to them. It goes beyond words. People think of plain language as plain words. It's much more than plain words. It's plain words, sentences, design, focus on the user task. All of those things come together to create a plain document that people can use. It makes your form more likely to be used. When people think something is easy, they're more likely to jump in and engage it and not walk away from it. It's more likely to be understood. It's more likely to be acted upon effectively. And what happens when people act on forms more quickly? It saves everyone time and energy. We get what we need from them faster. They get what they need from us faster. Everyone wins when you use this type of frame to guide your decision-making. So I want to thank you. We have these handouts about the Center for Plain Language, which we will be passing out. I encourage you to join. It's a wonderful organization. We support plain language and legislation. We educate. We publicize bad writing and good writing. And I want to encourage you, I am the lead judge for the Center's Clearmark Awards, which we give once a year to best documents representing plain language. These forms that you're redesigning, submit those. Get recognition nationally and internationally, because we have a lot of international members, for the great work that you're doing. Thank you.